woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind. It was stayed on Jesus. Hallelujah. Can't hate my neighbor when my mind is stayed on Jesus. Well, I can't hate my neighbor when my mind is stayed on Jesus. Well, I can't hate my neighbor when my mind is stayed on Jesus. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Love everybody when my mind is stayed on Jesus. I love everybody when my mind is stayed on Jesus. I love everybody when my mind is stayed on Jesus. Hallelujah. 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 And I'm going on to heaven with my mind. It is stayed on Jesus. Well, I'm going on to heaven with my mind. It is stayed on Jesus. Well, I'm going on to heaven with my mind. It is stayed on Jesus. Hallelujah. 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 Well, facing every trial with my mind, it is stayed on Jesus. Well, I'm facing every trial with my mind, it is stayed on Jesus. Well, I'm facing every trial with my mind, it is stayed on Jesus. Hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Yeah, I woke up this morning with my mind. It is stayed on Jesus. I woke up this morning with my mind. It is stayed on Jesus. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind. It is stayed on Jesus. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
In the old days, confirmation students would have to memorize things and recite them in front of the congregation. This is one of the hardest things for people to do. And in fact, when you talk to young people today about getting up in front of others and talking, the look of terror in their eyes is palpable. So it has become our tradition to produce a video where we give them a chance to express their thoughts and their feelings in a way that's quite gracious and wonderful. And so you're about to see the video from Sunday morning of this year's 2019 confirmation class. There are 10 people in this class. I should mention that the music playing in the background is a song by Andrew Peterson, but is performed by Joshua Countryman. on the guitar.
My name's Olivia Peterson.
My name is Avery Bartles.
I'm Allie Kalungi.
My name is Carly Paskey.
My name is Cameron Ratz.
Hi, I'm Carissa Ratz.
Hi, my name is Mitchell Budson.
Hi, my name is Ryan Meyer.
Hi, my name is Haley De La Garza.
Hi, my name is Blake Service.
I would like to thank my mom and dad and my grandparents and my sister for helping me.
I'd like to thank my mom and my dad, especially my mom, for all the years of Sunday school she taught, and that really, is the reason that I ended up at church. As well as my dad for supporting me through all my faith endeavors and wherever my faith journey took me.
And I would like to thank my mom and my dad for supporting me through everything, and my grandparents for taking me to their churches, and Nikki Briggs and Mike Lidner for taking me on the mission trip.
I'd like to thank my mom and my stepdad for bringing me here, and I'd like to thank Pastor Tom.
I'd like to thank my parents for supporting me and making me go to church when I was little and saying my prayers all the time, because without them, I would not be here right now.
I would like to thank my parents for all their support.
I would like to thank my mom and my dad. My mom just for kind of always being there for support. My dad because he pushes me while I'm playing guitar at church.
I'd like to thank my mom and my dad because they always pushed me when I was younger, when I didn't want to come to church, and I'm glad they did.
I would like to thank my parents for supporting me and making me go to church even though sometimes I don't want to, and I'm glad they did.
I'd like to thank my mom and my dad and my grandparents. And my grandpa Jim's a pastor, so he's been a really positive influence in my religious life and activities. In certain situations where I don't have anyone to talk to, I can talk to God. That makes me feel better. That higher power is very important to me and my family.
I believe that he's always there for you, that no matter how many times you screw up, you make mistakes. When my world's crashing down, I can take out my Bible, repeat my favorite Bible verse to myself, and, he's there, someone to turn to.
Sometimes people feel unloved and unneeded, but God is always there to make them feel loved. And even when the world doesn't love them, God still does.
I believe that God is always watching over you, and He loves you. Knowing that God is watching over me makes me think a little bit longer before making a decision.
I believe that God is always there for anyone who needs it. There's going to be times where your friends aren't going to be there for you, and your family could be making you mad sometimes, but with God, you can always talk to Him.
Because I know that God cares about me, I live my life being less scared.
He's always watching over us. From when I was really young, I always had that idea that he was kind of next to me. I always thought that he was with me at night and that he was going to be there even when I was scared.
If I feel down, if I just need to say something, I know he'll always be listening to me.
I believe that He's always there for people, and that He leads you into doing good things, and that He chooses your path, and it helps me think that I will have a good future and that He will lead me into doing the right things, and that gives me hope.
God is basically the person who created our very existence, so that means that there probably is something after life. Because why would God create existence if there was nothing after your life?
What I like about this church is that everyone is so friendly and welcoming, and no one really cares who you are. It's just that you're here and you're here for the same cause. I like our 9:15 service. When I was learning to play the ukulele, I would come in with my mom and we would jam out together. The music's really fun to play.
I really like the 9:15 service and kind of how chill and laid back it is.
I really like working in the nursery because I like spending time with the kids.
I like coming to this church because everybody's accepting and welcoming and friendly.
I like that everyone is super nice
to everybody, and they're not sassy.
I like this church because everyone is included and everyone knows each other.
So I go to the 9:15 service, and I like it because it's kind of everybody. You get a little bit of like every personality in there. And then I also like it because I like to play guitar.
What I like about the church the most is for services is the 10:30, because I like that everyone's always nice and says hi and always friendly, and that they're always asking how's your day going, if anything's new, and they'll listen to you. And I like Pastor's sermons, he always does.
Well, I kind of grew up in this church, so I've got like a lot of memories in it. People who like go here and like the people who work here are really friendly and like, you know, encourage you to be more involved in your religion, so that's really nice.
From the letter of Paul to the Ephesians. Remember that at one time you were separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one, and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new person in place of two, and in this way make peace, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby destroying all hostility. And he came and preached peace to you who were far off, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access in one Spirit to the Father. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the prophets and the apostles, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. I've noticed that whenever we get a new technology, it's utilized in a way that's designed to help create community, help us find a connection with other people. So, for example, if you play video games, what started out as a solitary event in your home is now an online event where not only are you playing with other people who aren't even in the same room with you, but you can talk to them on a headset and over time become friends with them, become community with them. And so someone you never have met before may be a person that you communicate with on a regular basis and have at least a friendly interaction with. This is not all that new. We've been doing this for a long time, ever since people got together. They would find ways to form communities, to sit together, to be close, to be connected. And the bigger our society got, and the more that we had to sort of move outside of our immediate circle of life and living in order to work or function, the more important it became for us to find these groups. In one period of time, there were societies like Masons and Oddfellows who are, now they struggle for members, but at one time that was where you found connections to people. Or maybe it was the neighborhood coffee clutch where you got together and played cards. Or maybe it was the party line, if you can remember that far back, where you could listen in on conversations that everyone was having, and so that became a way to be in community together. And so we would find all of these different communities, neighborhood groups, community groups, now online communities that we connect with. And we do this because we feel isolated and alone in the world, and we want and long for that connection to somebody, a place where we can be real and authentic and be ourselves. And we find these communities of like-minded people. I just read recently a book on marketing, and the author kept talking about how the whole central theme of marketing is the convincing people that people like us drive this kind of car, or people like us join this kind of health club. And so this notion of finding people like us, and we go around looking for people like us, so we feel like we can just be ourselves. One of the things that starts to happen over time, however, is that we realize that we are not really ourselves. We edit ourselves. Sometimes there are even rules for editing. Like, for example, if you're getting together to play cards at the card group, and we say, don't talk about religion or politics, because we know how divisive these things are, because everyone knows you're there to play cards and gossip about the neighbors. And so that becomes part of it. We actually find ourselves holding back certain aspects of who we are, afraid and worried that if somebody knew the truth about us, that they wouldn't like us, that they wouldn't want us to be a part of that group. And in this way, we acknowledge that as much as we seek and long for people like us so that we can have a community and a connection, we're not really like anybody else. We don't find people like us. Instead, we find ourselves still, even in those places, connecting to a degree, but not to the fullness we long for. We're looking for something deeper, something so profound that it transcends all of the distinctions of politics and race and worldview and ideology and socioeconomic class, all of those things that we normally use to identify who people like us are. We're looking for a place where we can just be ourselves and be honest and not really have to worry that someone will not love us. They might not agree with us, but they won't reject us. The disagreement can actually be maybe even constructive, maybe it can be healthy. It can be a conversation that leads to greater insight. Or even if the disagreement is an intractable one, it doesn't mean irreconcilable differences. It's not irreconcilable differences. We can still be together and be with and for each other and honest about who we are and have that be okay. And that's really what we seek. We sort of wish and hope that family could be that way, but it's never that way. We always think that we know best how our siblings should be living their lives, or, if you're a parent, we always have opinions about the choices our children make, and so there's always that feeling like, there's some judgment there, or there's, oh, what if I don't live up to those expectations? That again, I can't be myself. And sometimes it's extreme and terrible. My wife and I were just recently at the grocery store. We had gone to see a movie, and it was at the end of the evening when there aren't that many people in the grocery store. And I don't know if you know this, but I've noticed that that's when the cashiers get particularly chatty, and you end up in a conversation with a person who's otherwise a total stranger. And that's what happened. We ended up in a conversation with this cashier. And during the course of the conversation, it came out that he was gay, and he went on to tell us how when he had come out to his parents, his mother had said, "I would rather that you were dead." This is 2019. Can you believe that? In 2019, that's still how people are. For years, he had to keep that secret. And when he finally came out, the very thing he feared would happen happened. He was rejected by his own family. So we keep searching, we keep seeking for something. The section I was reading to you from the Apostle Paul, the letter to the Ephesians, is a description of part of what you might call Paul's project, Paul's theological project. We tend to read it as a kind of post-Reformation era way of understanding, and to say Paul's project was to explain salvation by grace through faith. But that's not really it. That's the outcome of Paul's project, but Paul's real project was to explain how a person who is not an Israelite, not part of the chosen people, can yet become a part of a community committed to the Messiah Jesus, the Messiah promised to the Israelite community in the first place. This is kind of a crazy thing to think about, but that's what Paul is up to. How can someone who's not Jewish, as we would describe it today, follow the Jewish Messiah without actually having to become Jewish in the process. That's what Paul is working on. That's what he's talking about. And in the process of talking about it, he also finds himself talking about the implications of that. And one of them is the implications for community. Paul talks about how there used to be two, he describes it as two people. One people is the Gentile people who are far off, strangers and aliens. Another people are the Israelite people who are near, close to God, who are the citizens of God's kingdom. And he says, those of you who are far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. And he goes on to explain that God's intention is not just that there be now two people who are brought together as fellow citizens, but in fact, even as fellow citizens, they are one new person, one new person. Paul talks about this same concept in the book of Galatians, where he says, in Christ there is no longer slave or free, Jew or Greek, male or female, just one in Christ. And this reflects actually what we see in the early church. The early church was a startling, messy, diverse community that kept knocking down barriers and including people who didn't belong. And if you track it, you kind of start with Jesus and his disciples who, let's be honest, were a really crazy bunch of guys. I mean, on the one hand, you have people who are professional harvesters of fish. That's what they did for a living. I don't like to say fishermen because that draws into our minds, this thing. But these guys use nets and they harvest fish from the Sea of Galilee. They were professionals, but they were hardworking, probably what we would think of as middle class people. But then you also had individuals who were part of the upper class, who were related to the elites, the priests. You had people who were, you had at least one who was a member of the, I call them the local Al-Qaeda. They were the partisans, we say today Zionists. The Romans called them the Sicari, because Sicari for the Latin word to slash with a knife, because that's how they assassinated their enemies. You might think of them as Taliban even. I mean, they were very extreme. Historically, they were referred to as the Zealots. At least that's how it comes to us in the Bible, the Zealots. And at least one of his disciples was a zealot. I mean, this is a ragtag bunch of guys who should never have been together. And you can actually see that because they're arguing all the time about stuff. And yet there they are together as followers of Jesus. And not only that, but that community is a community where women are in significant leadership. And that's really surprising. As an example, Mary Magdalene, by the way, Mary never was a prostitute, okay? That may work great in a TV show or a movie or something, but she was never a prostitute. She was just a woman who happened to be sick. Jesus healed her, and as a result, she became his disciple. And he apparently became very, very close to him, a dear friend, and so much so that she's the first one who saw him alive after the resurrection. She's the first one to report the good news that Christ is risen because she had seen him with her own eyes. And so she comes to be called the apostle to the apostles and is listed in the lists of apostles that come for years later. And that leadership of women in the early community, I mean, this is stunning in its own way, but this continues. Paul mentions in his letter to the Romans a woman named Junia, who's an apostle. And we have a 2nd century letter from the governor Pliny, writing to the Emperor Trajan. I think it's the Emperor Trajan. And in it we see that he makes reference to women who are deacons in the church. Deacons, that's ordained clergy in the church. So women were clergy in the early church, at least until the 2nd century. Not only that, but if you look at the way the church starts out, so it starts out as this group of people who don't fit together, and then on the day we call Pentecost, so that's sometimes called the birthday of the church. On that day, there's a great number of people who convert, but so the church initially is composed of Judeans, people from Judah, along with people from Galilee. So it's Judeans, Galileans, and that's about it. And suddenly it includes all of these people who we call diaspora Jews. So these are people who hold to the same religious traditions but speak all kinds of different languages. But they all recognize each other as part of the community of Israel. And then very quickly we realize that includes not only this diaspora Jewish community, but it also includes those who are called the Hellenistic Jews. Now, these are the Jews who aren't very Jewish. It's everyone thinks maybe they do like to have bacon on their hamburgers or something because they just don't. And they don't really read Hebrew. They prefer Greek. They dress Greek. They act Greek. They prefer Greek culture, and so they're looked down as kind of second-class Jews, inferior versions of the Israelite religion, and maybe not quite entirely kosher. And so they tended to be put in the back of the line during this serving of food, because we can't have you mix in and contaminate the food until all the good kosher people have gone first. That actually creates the first struggle and conflict in the churches about that very thing. But just the fact that they're there is stunning, and the church has to address that and deal with that. And after you've got that kind of a mix within the Jewish community, all kinds of people, Pharisees, Sadducees, zealots, people who have no particular religious affiliation among the different sects of Judaism, and then you have the Hellenistic Jews in there too, and then suddenly Samaritans are coming into the Christian community. Samaritans, they're technically Israelites, but they're also considered heretics. And they become a part of this thing, and it gets even bigger and more awkward and more crazy and more mixed together. And then beyond that, you suddenly have Gentiles. I mean, these are people who aren't even circumcised, which is a big deal in the ancient world. And they certainly don't keep kosher. They like pork. And yet they're part of this community too. And finally, there's a wonderful story of the preaching by Philip to a man who's from Ethiopia, who is by religion Jewish and maybe ancestry as well. It's hard to say if he's a convert or if he is a born an Israelite, but he's also a eunuch. And the eunuchs in the ancient world, these are the people who don't fit our simple binary male-female definitions. These are those people who fall in the other places that we can't really label very well. These people even become a part of the Christian community. Do you see how wild this is? How crazy and how mixed up and all these different kinds of people. And yes, it created conflict. Absolutely created conflict. Because part of us longs for exactly what the church is supposed to be, a community where love transcends distinction, and where distinctions themselves simply become part of the patchwork of it, the glory of it, the beauty of it, is that it's not just all the same, but it's unique and different, and every person stands out as something special. But at the same time, we're always seeking folks like us, people like us. And so what do? We self-select. We self-select groups on the internet that look like us. We self-select people who look like us. We self-select churches that look like us. But here's the truth. There's nobody like you. You are unique and you are special. And if you go looking from now until the day of your death, you will never find a community of people who are like you. Instead, you find a place, one of two kinds. Either a place where you can fit in if you hide certain aspects of yourself, or a place where you can be who you are and people love you and accept you and maybe argue with you sometimes, but still wrap their arms around you and receive you as a brother or as a sister. Or if neither of those definitions work, they receive you however you are. That's the vision, that's the thing we long for, is that kind of church. May God help us become that kind of church.
Rest in me whenever storm clouds gather. Rest in me when the sunlight you cannot see. Trust in my love, for I will never fail you. I am your God, so dear child, rest in me. You are my heart in a world that's grown so cold. You are my child, and I ever am your father. You are my hands warming others from the cold. So rest in me whenever storm clouds gather. Rest in me when the sunlight you cannot see. Trust in my love, for I will never fail you. I am your God, so dear child, rest in